Good evening, everybody, and a big welcome to you. Thank you for joining us in Series 2 called Thinking Gay. Tonight, the title is, What's So Secretive? You'll remember from last week, if you joined us, that we reviewed episode 1 or part 1 of Emily's podcast in the series Stories of Our Times. And we spoke about the fact, well, first of all, we had marriage and family therapist David Pickup and trauma therapist Dr. Anne Gillies, David from the US and Anne from Canada. And we discussed Emily's first part to her podcast. If you joined us for the very first time, Emily Sargent has been examining the topic of so-called conversion therapy. And in it, she makes a case that this is something secretive and something that is almost always damaging. And we're here really to review those claims and to consider how she is framing her point of view. So if you'd like to check out the previous broadcasts, do have a look at the IFTCC YouTube page, and there you'll see episodes 1 and episodes 2. Welcome, Laura. It's good to see you.
Hi, Mike. Good to see you too. And we're joined tonight by X Out Loud forerunners, Simon Freelove and Matthew Grech, both of whom have left the homosexual lifestyle. And this evening we'll be taking a look at the second part of Thinking Straight, entitled Uncover by Emily Sargent. And the question is, what's so secretive? Is it really true that sexual orientation change practices are extremely secretive, as Emily claims?
Great, thank you, Laura. So let's bring in Matthew and Simon. I think we're having a bit of a struggle with Simon right now because of internet issues, but we'll keep trying and hopefully he'll come as soon as he can. But Matthew, welcome again. Thank you for coming. How are you doing?
Thank you. It's good to be in your company once again. I'm doing well. I listened to the second episode of Thinking Straight by Emily Sargent, and I think it's a good topic of discussion tonight.
Matthew, you direct X Out Loud. What's in the name? Why X Out Loud? What's that all about?
Well, I think everybody has an X. Everybody was delivered from something through their relationship with Christ. And so X is all about, for us, it means those who left L, G, B, or T, lesbian, gay, bisexual, trans, and just unwanted identities that no longer reflect who we are. And most of us are motivated by our faith journey. So it's time to celebrate our X out loud, because what we were, we no longer are. And that's our celebration, that we were freed from stuff that we didn't want any longer in our lives. So,
So now, Matthew, I know looking back at what X Out Loud has done over the months that it's been in existence, you seem to do interviews. You are regularly on these broadcasts. It seems to me that you're quite out there. Is that accurate?
Yes. Well, I guess I'm quite a vocal person. I like to speak up. So I couldn't, for example, be looking at a picture of two men getting married and adopting children, not say something on news articles, And every time I speak, I notice that that people react, and I think that's healthy because they're just so used to listening to one point of view that anything else has become controversial. But I think what is controversial is how much we got used to lifestyles that we think are perverse and, ungodly in our day and age. So I think that's controversial.
Just for our viewers, you may not know that Matthew is talking about a real case in which he responded to quite a famous couple in the US, one of the individuals having a Maltese surname. And Matthew commented, I think, on social media, and that's what he's referring to. It was picked up in Malta, and Matthew's face is there in the middle of this kind of debate. The point I'm making, Sarah, and I'd love to get your, Laura, I'd love to get your perspective here, is this question of secrecy. I mean, Emily, certainly Emily's, I don't know what she is, producer, talks about the secrecy of conversion therapy until now. And then the podcast continues. What do you make of that?
Emily Sargent was certainly able to find clips of people talking about their experience of change. And the name of their program is X Out Loud.
That's very revealing.
I think every effort is being made to share their experiences, every effort possible in the face of being silenced. So if there's any secret, it's that it's coming from those who want to silence, not from those who are experiencing change or want to talk about how they experience change. And Emily didn't seem to have any problem finding them all on the internet, all over the internet, and it's X Out Loud. So I think the Secretive is a way to build suspense. It's a journalistic tool to build suspense and to justify deceptive journalism.
Well, it's really interesting. Simon, Simon will be here. Sorry about this, folks. We're just having some technical issues right now, but we'll be back in a few minutes. The thing is, folks, I spent some time recently looking at the YouTube for X Out Loud and the YouTube for IFTCC, Core Issues Trust, Voices of the Silenced, and I am seeing not a few, but several hundred hours viewing every 28 days and many thousands of visits. So I get the impression that we're not so secretive. And I think that's the point we're making in terms of all of this. Are we ready for Simon? Hi, Simon. Can you hear us?
I can't see you, but I hear you.
Oh, well, that's probably no bad thing at all, Simon. You're very welcome. Would you introduce yourself and tell us something about who you are and tell us what X Out Loud is for you?
My name is Simon Freelove. I'm from the Valleys and I currently live in Newport. I've lived in Newport for about 14, 15 years, and I work as a teacher. I work in Bristol. I have varied interests. I like animals, and I'm part of a local church in Newport, and I have been following the Lord since 2012, and X Out Loud for me is an opportunity to sort of interact with like-minded individuals which are on a similar journey as myself.
That's very clear. Simon, tell us, what do you think of this name X Out Loud? What does it mean to you to be X Out Loud? What are you saying there?
Well, what I'm saying is that I think it's quite clear that I'm no longer sort of following the gay lifestyle that I once embraced, and I was very sort of unapologetic for it, and I particularly care what people thought, and I just lived my own life. And what this means for me is that I'm saying that I've come out of that lifestyle or that way of life, and for me, that's what it means for me.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Simon. Simon, I want to introduce you to Dr. Laura Haynes. Laura is a therapist who has been working for many years in this field. I'm not sure you've met.
Hello, Simon. I've seen you give your testimony, but we haven't met. And I'm
no, we've seen each other quite a few times.
And I'm very happy that you're giving your testimony out loud.
Excellent. Folks, I'm going to just share something with you now for a few minutes. We'll come back to Simon and to Matthew in a few minutes. But some of you will know that if you've been following this series, that we've been looking at the whole question of evidence and how it needs to be used in different disciplines. And we've looked at archaeology in the context of the Vesuvian eruptions in AD 79. We're going to again shift focus slightly today and look at a film that is actually about silencing, but in the same era and the same context, because of course slavery was something that was very much part of the ancient society. And what I think is apparent is that it's really difficult to hear the voices of the slaves. They've been silenced. And I guess the question needs to be asked as to why they've been silenced and what has led up to that. And obviously, this is an issue that I think relates to power and to the politics of the day. So just to recap very briefly, you'll remember that about this time, the Romans were in Judea, and specifically, they were busy with controlling the Jewish people in Jerusalem. And this led to a great war between Titus, the general, and the people of Jerusalem, to the point that many hundreds of thousands of people were killed and slain during the time. The temple was sacked, and many people, 98,000 or so people, were taken into captivity and had to leave Judea and Jerusalem. And many of them apparently were taken to Italy and specifically to Rome. And many of them then were involved in the building of the Colosseum. After that, they were dispersed into society generally. And I think for some people, that was the reality of their personal history. They became slaves and they were in slavery probably for the rest of their lives. So I think it's important just to remember something about what happened to them. Take a look at this film. I have to believe that for people of faith and for Christians in particular, coming back to Pompeii is really important because, in a sense, this is the default position of how society and life was in ancient times before the gospel came. The record doesn't show that there were Christians here. There's been lots of speculation and many attempts to prove that Christians and Jewish people were here, and it's disputed on every level. But for me, I think one of the most important things is that before the gospel impacted, the Roman world had achieved so much, and there was a set of values in terms of how they lived their lives, how they entertained, how they imposed laws, and how they went about the judiciary. All of those things, everybody knows, made a major and significant and lasting impact on the world. But when the gospel came, things began to change, and the Roman Empire began to decline, until later on, as we know, the Emperor Constantine Christianized the decaying Roman Empire. And so the history of the church grew from that point. But for me, Pompeii is important because it's really the story of what a pansexual society is all about and the values that are associated with a pansexual perspective and understanding of human sexuality. And that has to be of relevance today as we move back towards paganism and as we seek to reinstate the power of the state over the individual. I think this is a place that we really do need to revisit. Over the years, so many documentaries and films, feature films and dramas have been made featuring Pompeii and the beautiful artworks and different things that have been found here. The archaeological and the historical evidence of the site is without question. But I think very often what we fail to pick up on are the silent voices, the voices of those who very definitely were a part of the structure of the region, who helped to build these great edifices, whose skill and workmanship was absolutely beyond question and was invaluable. The hands of the slaves are really important, but we know so little about the role that they played in terms of how they felt, where they came from, and what was significant in their lives. What happened to the slaves? Where did they come from? How did they feel about the situation that they found themselves in? What was life like for them in those days? And so much is said about the great edifices that we see around the place, the beautiful frescoes and artistic pieces that have been found, and the objects that have real and abiding historical significance. But what about the slaves, the people who actually empowered all of this and made it work, the people who dragged out the canvas awnings over the amphitheater, those who put water in the baths, those who cleaned houses, those who sewed, those who educated children? Very often these are the people who kept this society together, and yet there is so little in the record about their lives, how they felt, what they experienced. The interesting thing is that the sources tell us about the irritations their slave masters felt about their impertinence or their slovenliness or their idleness, but we hear very little, probably nothing, from the slaves themselves. I think that's one of the things that we need to explore during this time. There's been some really important work about the more silent voices that must have been common in Pompeii and places like this. Those who did the work, those who really had no identity or personality apart from what was created for them by the slave masters, but in later years the historians who archived the material and then retold their story. Part of the problem is we don't seem to have very much material from the slave voices themselves. And I think it would be absolutely fascinating to know what the interaction of the values of the slaves and the Roman world that they found themselves in, how that played out in terms of their own consciousness and their sense of conscience and their sense of morality and their sense of understanding. What were the ordinary people thinking and doing during these times? How did they feel about things that were imposed upon them that may have been absolutely contrary to the values that they had known in the home country that they came from? I think it's really important to ask why it is that the historical record has been silent about the plight of slaves in places like this. Is it that the scholars have read into the sources and into the archive of sources and materials that we have in a way that yields a voice that is really quite weak? Or is it that just never heard from the slaves? Is it that they were so low ranking in terms of the work that they were doing and their status in life, that of course we're not going to hear from them, because it's only the people in the higher echelons of life who would leave the statues and the busts and the material records that would reflect on the culture that they lived. I think it's really important also for people of faith to begin to think about the Jewish slaves who would have been brought from Jerusalem after the fall of the Second Temple in AD 70. What would it have been like for them if they had been absorbed into the Roman culture of Pompeii? It's in the Stabian Baths here in Pompeii that we have the opportunity to unravel the complex relationship between slaves and slave owners. In our trying to understand the role and the place of slaves in a society like Pompeii, it's good to remember that Josephus reports that 97,000 slaves were taken into captivity after the fall of Jerusalem in AD 70. 97,000 slaves may not have landed up in this area of the world for sure, but we know in all probability 22,000 of them were engaged in building the Colosseum in Rome. So what happened to those who were absorbed in the households that made up Pompeii? What was their life experience? What were their memories? What were their dreams? What were their spirits like within them in this new sense of bondage that they were experiencing? I think it's important to remember that their identities, if they were here, those Jewish slaves, have been lost. Although there are some evidences in the form of graffiti that would indicate there was a Jewish presence here, although some people would dispute it. It's important to see that these people were lost in this culture. Their voices that had once been prevalent and had been important in Jerusalem, their homeland, or in Judea, their homeland, were forgotten in this place. It seems to me that the Romans were meticulous in terms of how they took care of themselves, the way they bathed themselves, the way they went through the bath house into rooms that were cold and warm, the massage opportunities, the opportunity to cleanse themselves with olive oil, indicates that these were people who took pride in the way they presented themselves. So it seems likely to me that their slaves also had to be groomed properly, especially those attending them in the baths. There would, of course, be slaves on the outside taking care of the heating and the menial tasks. But what about those slaves who were moneyed, or perhaps who had a great deal of independence, who were business people, who had technical competence and skills, and were employed by their masters to run businesses? I understand that these were privately owned, but I think it's really interesting to begin to unravel the relationship between slave and slave owners when you come to a place like this. Certainly it wasn't open to everyone. In all probability, people came at different times. Men and women bathed separately. But it's interesting to think of the position of the slaves in all of this. The thing about trying to capture the presence of the slaves in places like this, or cities like Pompeii, is that it's really very difficult. The point has been made, however, that their invisibility, the fact that they appear in some frescoes and disappear in most, or are found in some buildings but are not allowed in others, means that this invisibility has been created and is sustained through sources depending on who's created them and for what purpose. It seems we can see, or at best hear, the slaves only through glimpses that their slave owners permit us to access, and this means that we meet them only in contexts of servitude. The really interesting thing about Pompeii is the way in which different communities lived side by side, people working in different sectors. So just down the road we have the lupinarium, and here close by we have the wool merchants, people who washed the wool, cleansed the wool, made sure it was dyed, put it into some kind of sellable format. That's what they did in the place behind me. We've just visited the lupinarium, where the prostitutes worked. They were slaves engaged in a job just like anybody else. But the wool merchants, the people who brought in the wool, washed it, prepared it, dyed it, got it ready for sales, they would also be slaves who would be under the control of slave owners. The very important thing about the book by Lauren Hackworth Patterson and Sandra Joshel is that it shows side by side different communities working, and they make the point that the way in which the histories have been reconstructed concerning people working in these two places is very important. We know all about the lupinarium, we know about the frescoes that have been preserved. If you go into the building, it's been properly restored. A great deal of money and time and effort has been put into that particular artifact. But if you look at what has happened here, you'll see very little work has gone into the restoration of the wool shop. We know nothing about the slaves. If there were any frescoes, they've gone, vanished, lost for all time. So it's very interesting that the sources of the stories and the histories that we have are enhanced for some groups and lost for others. And we can say it's just because sex is much more interesting than wool. But the point is, those who work with the sources and the narratives from the sources that we have work in a way that influences the stories that we now have and our understanding of life during these times. Now we're talking about silencing and how silencing operates in a society. We've just looked at something about what took place in ancient times in Pompeii. But I'd like us now just to turn our attention to this whole thing about silencing as it's taking place in the 21st century, particularly around the issues that we're dealing with today. And I'd love to ask Laura and Matthew and Simon, do you have a perspective on how silencing is working in our times these days? Anybody?
I think Emily really would like to silence us. And I think that there's quite a different worldview from which she comes and from which we come. She feels a dissonance and that our worldview isn't a fit for her and her worldview is not a fit for us. And I'm not sure she can or feels an interest in or a need to understand from our perspective how her worldview looks to us, but she is certainly expressing how our world looks to her. And I think we would like to remedy that one-way direction of communication, which is heading towards or intending, actually, a very outspoken intention to silence us and those who have a different view.
That's helpful, Laura. What about you, Matthew? What's your experience of silencing?
Yeah, well, I think what most governments have been legislating for is all about wanting to silence people with a different point of view, as Laura is pointing out. And there's a proposal in the UK to ban so-called conversion therapy. And the truth is that there will be less people who are willing to promote an alternative view, especially in the media and journalists. And that for me is concerning because, that will end up creating a monoculture where only one point of view is displayed and is given to the people. And I'm seeing the effects of what that does to people as a whole, in general, the people out there, the multitudes. they're only taught that one is born gay, that they cannot change, and just seeing the impact that has on even young people who are questioning their sexuality, in thousands upon thousands of them are just so confused about their identities and who they are. And that people like us who promote actually family-friendly values, values that promote procreation, and the traditional family, we being silenced, that's just gonna leave them with only one single option. And if some of them don't even want to be in a homosexual lifestyle, they're not given another option. I think that leaves them very hopeless. How will they build families? How will they build futures if they're just simply told that that's who they are and that's what they need to follow? So I think it's dangerous.
Thank you. What about you, Simon? Do you have any thoughts about this whole thing of silencing and how it's beginning to operate in our country and in our world?
What I see, what I feel, that there's like a bombardment in schools, on the media, of the whole sort of concept of sexuality, gay and homosexuality, and transgenderism, and everything. And it just seems a constant bombardment on billboards, on adverts. It's constantly in your face, and it's like sort of one point of view is just being rammed in your face constantly, that there's not an alternative way to sort of live and express yourself. And in the 1930s in Germany, when Hitler was rising to power with all his speeches, there was sort of just one point of view constantly being put across. Now, I'm not saying it's in the same league in this country, but if there was an alternative view, they were silenced a lot more drastically, may I say. I'm not saying it's done the same way in this country, but it's a similar thing. And when the government comes up with this proposal of banning conversion therapy, only sort of one point of view is being expressed, the extremes of it. You can get extremes in anything, yeah. But anything can be twisted and sort of infiltrated, but they just sort of going on to the extremes. And another point of view is not being allowed to express it. It's like sort of done, it's like done and signed away, and it's they say research. Nobody's come and asked us. It's just on the LGBTQ community. But, there's more than the gay community, the straight community. Society is made up of different people. There's all types and shapes and sizes, races, religious points of views. There's all different types of people. So I think it's sort of... It's very one-sided. It's not debated properly.
My name is Simon Freelove and I've come from Newport. I have struggled with same-sex attraction for most of my life. My sexuality was awakened at a very early age inappropriately. I wish that my feelings were never woken up before my teenage years, and I just thought, do I want this anymore? I've become tired of it. I've become tired of the one-night stands not being fulfilled inside of my heart. And about a month later, on a Thursday night meeting, I broke down. At the end of the meeting, I took a Bible with me and read about the immoral man in Corinthians. And I thought, this is me. I called out to the Lord and He prayed for me. And my journey started there. If people want to come out of same-sex attraction and want to seek help, they should have the right to do that. Because I have rights as well. Although we are a minority who have come out of gay lifestyles, lesbianism and transgender and whatever. I have rights. I have rights. If I want to seek help and want to be free of same-sex attraction, people are being prejudiced to me. I have a right too.
My name's Kieran, I'm from Leicester. I was raised in a Sikh family. Earlier on in my pre-teens, I was experiencing same-sex attraction. Probably towards my early adulthood that I kind of really accepted this is who I am. Did feel I had to hide it at the beginning, and because I felt it would bring shame upon my family coming from an Indian culture. Actually was in a long-term relationship where my ex-partner encountered God, and through her experience, learning about Jesus and learning about the Bible, the words that were coming out of her mouth just resounded in my heart. The Bible was speaking to me, the story she was telling me about Jesus and who he was. It was like an undeniable truth that was internalizing in me. I couldn't deny it. I thought I was born gay. This is why I pursued this identity with such a passion. I built this whole life up based on this lie. But the words of the Bible and the words of Jesus resounded so much to me that I left the life of homosexuality. Change is possible. People who say you can't change is false, it's lie, it's a mindset. I believe change is possible because it's happened to me. My response to politicians that want to ban any sort of help available to people like me who've come out of the life of homosexuality or same-sex attraction is that you are cutting us off from the support that individuals may require. We are already a minority group within a minority, and I think people like us will need support in some places or at some point in their lives. I think it's my decision whether I'm able to move forward with that new decision, whether I can move forward with leaving homosexuality and living a life where I don't have to practice that anymore. X Out Loud, they're like a family to me. They're a great support. It's so encouraging to have people around you who have shared similar journeys, such as coming out of same-sex attraction relationships. And now that together we can look forward to our futures and living a life of happiness and peace.
My name's Sam. I'm 29 years old and I'm from Devon. I came out when I was 15 years old. I was never ashamed of the fact that I was attracted to men. I very much had a typical gay life of having boyfriends. I just felt that there was a disconnect, and that was a pattern I was seeing in all my relationships. And as a result, I separated myself from boys and other men, and that left a hole in my heart, and that had to be filled with something. Now I realise it's more of a spiritual and emotional connection that I need rather than a sexual connection. So Boris Johnson's trying to implement a ban on what he calls conversion therapy. Now what this means for people like me is churches that are not able to counsel their members, and effectively that would have an effect on what they can and can't preach in their own church. And this wouldn't just go for churches, it would go for mosques and synagogues and all these other religious institutions and places of worship. So what that means is that Boris Johnson and whoever he's working with, or whoever will replace him in the future, will have their foot in the door of religious institutions, and therefore they will be able to start dictating what people can and can't preach as right or wrong. And I think that's very dangerous. I think it's important that my story is shared because I haven't come from anyone telling me that I am not allowed to be gay or to have relationships with men. I've come from a background where it was accepted completely. And I found out for myself that it just doesn't work. It just doesn't work. What I would say to members of Parliament is that I would ask them to think who stands to gain from this ban and who stands to lose. The people who gain, I suspect, are people with very sinister political agendas, and that doesn't sit right with me. So that's why I'm sharing my story.
I am Libby. I grew up in a Christian family. My parents divorced. My mum fell ill shortly after. I watched my mum die. My dad went and married another woman, and that taught me this lesson that what my mum had was not enough. That was around the time that I discovered transgenderism. When I was 21, I ended up God called me back to the church. I went on an amazing journey to get to where I am now. Returning to womanhood has been intense. It's not been easy, but It's been so rewarding that I couldn't describe the amount of fulfillment that I've got from just that. To me, the most amazing miracle is that I can sit here right now wearing a dress and none of it's false, none of it's fake. So the thing that really motivated my new confidence with that sort of piece with my gender was my relationship with God. It was personal. It was something that no human being could ever have put in me. I wasn't alone anymore. There were other people with the same convictions and the same values as me. X Out Loud came along at a point where I really needed somebody to encourage me that I was a woman. It made me feel like what I was doing was possible.
My name is Christian, I'm Italian. I grew up in a dysfunctional family where I felt a lot of abuse from my mom. I felt no love and I felt abandonment. I felt rejection. I started to feel the same-sex attraction and I felt a lot of shame and fear. And my medication, I think, it was pornography because I became so addicted to pornography. I was watching pornography every week, sometimes every day, to be honest. And I was thinking I was born gay. And before the 18, actually, didn't have any gay experience because for me it was like a taboo and it was a secret. But I felt disconnected as well from other guys, from building friendship. And when I got 18, I decided to leave my house. So it's been like a season of 8 months. I went to work in hospitality, hotel, far away from my house. But actually, I destroyed my life because I started to use a lot of ecstasy and I started to have a gay experience as well. The gay relationship or the sexual gay experience, they were not fulfilling my heart because, to be honest, I was looking for love and friendship and connection, but I didn't find it. I find actually people were looking only for sex and fun. Personally, I think nobody born gay, and I'm not born gay. And I don't reprime anything, but actually I find in Christ my true identity. I find a real love because I was looking for love. I was not looking actually for sex, but I was looking for connection and love. And in Christ I find love and connection.
My name is Tia and I was sexually abused. That's when I started exploring my sexuality and I pursued the same-sex attraction. In 2016, I started getting into depression. I had a girlfriend, I was living with her. I had a perfect relationship, you know. I started hearing thoughts in my head to kill myself. And one day, I think it was beginning of 2017, I was actually thinking, should I cut my wrists? Should I overdose myself with something? What do I do? Strangely, I heard another voice, a different voice that I never heard before. And that voice told me, what is stopping you from God? Try God. I started crying and I said that I've done this in my life, I've done that. And as I'm saying these things, the actual images of the things that I did wrong started flashing before my eyes one by one. And I'm looking at them and I'm saying, I've done this, yes, I've done that, I've done this. And now I'm done with my life. And God, if you are real, you know, I need you to save me because I'm done. I just noticed that as I opened my eyes, I noticed something heavy just lifted off of my shoulders. I physically felt that. And I didn't even know what happened to me. I felt so much peace in my heart. My depression and everything just like that, it's just disappeared. I started reading the Bible. I became more hungry for God. You know, I just didn't feel attracted to women anymore. I was looking for people who have left that kind of lifestyle. I came across X Out Loud and it gave me a sense of belonging. It just makes you feel safe to have those people around where you can discuss your experiences. It's just become my family. I think it's important for me to tell my stories because I would like to encourage people who are going through that, who are genuinely looking for help, that there is hope. There are people like yourself. Look at me, I'm here. You know, I've been on that lifestyle, I've come out of it, and I have no desire to go back. Politicians or the activists, they have no right to take that freedom away. This is our right. As humans, we have a right. because everybody has a right. I want to have my right as well, to live the way I want to live.
I'm Rob from the UK. Realised I found no satisfaction in the gay life, having come out some years before. Deeply dissatisfied with the results of the gay life. People had told me what I could get in gay life, and I'd really gone into that for a couple of decades, and I think that there was some sort of deficit of male affection. Where I went looking, I didn't find what I was looking for. It didn't satisfy me. It made me depressed. I just was totally and utterly disillusioned. Everything I'd hoped and wanted didn't happen. I don't think it's anyone else's place to patronise me and tell me that I don't know what's best for me. You know, I lived the gay life for a couple of decades and it didn't work for me. So, yeah, it's no one else's place to come along and say, you can't explore something different. I say, don't tell me who I am. I know myself better than anyone in the world. And I know what feelings I've had throughout the course of my life. And I know what things I've tried, and I know the intimate details of that. So no one else can tell me who I really am. And I have direct personal experience of things in my life that have been harmful, that have brought me misery. And ultimately, that's what the gay life gave me. And in seeking help to move away from that type of life, I've actually gained more freedom and peace. That my experience of therapy to help me go in a different direction sexually has been freeing and has helped me to move towards my dreams. To the government, I would say, I think it's overstepping the mark in a free society when a government says to me that I can't pursue a certain way of life. I should be free to pursue the kind of sexual relationships with other adults that I want to. And to get help to do that, I want to explore my heterosexual side, and I think I've got the right to do that. If I've been harmed, please tell me how I've been harmed, because I have not experienced that. I've experienced freedom.
Great video. Thank you so much, Matthew, for all of the work that went into that, and very touching and powerful testimony, Simon. God bless you. You know what's interesting to me in episode 2 of Emily Sargent's podcast, she says this: I find the way these testimonies use the language of therapy and psychology fascinating and unnerving. What do you make of that, Laura?
Well, I think she's dealing with a clash of worldviews, and the worldview she's clashing it with was just beautifully illustrated by the testimonies and the life stories we heard. The people we just heard from identify with as LGBT. They reject that identity, in contrast to those who identify as LGBT. So when research is showing us, and these stories are really illustrating in a beautiful way for us, that non-LGBT identified people generally are conservative, orthodox, religious in their beliefs. They don't believe their sexual orientation is biologically determined. You heard that. They prioritize their religious identity over their sexual identity. Their religious identity is who they are, not sexual feelings they have. They have a greater participation in religious services. They go weekly or more often. LGBT identified people, most of them do not. Religion and spirituality are significantly and positively linked to health for them. They talked about how their depression and suicidality decreased, and they felt peace, and they felt they came home to themselves. Yeah. But there's no link between LGBT identified and health. They don't experience that link, that it's health leads to health for them. The non-LGBT identified get their community support from the religious community, the LGBT identified from their LGBT community. The non-LGBT identified individuals are no less healthy, satisfied with life and flourishing, contrary to the minority stress theory that identifies religion as a source of sexual minority stress. It is different for this group. And they place primacy on chastity or a heterosexual relationship. Emily said she felt she had a choice to be helped towards those ends or not. And she had a choice as to whether she wanted this therapy. And non-LGBT identified people report that nearly all change-oriented therapy goals were substantially helpful for them rather than harmful. So we really have different populations here from different worldviews, living in different silos and not being allowed to get the communication out there about both groups. We're doing our best to make this not a secret any longer. And Emily said Carol was empathic, non-judgmental, said who she was, what her viewpoint is, how she works, and asked Emily if that was what she wanted. So she reached out to Emily and gave her a chance to give informed consent to the kind of therapy she does or not. And Emily, certainly, who can not know, she had a choice to go to another therapist of another viewpoint.
Okay, thank you, Laura. Matthew, how do you experience this? Because Emily seems to be saying that somehow ex-out-louders have absorbed language around therapy and psychology. Do you think that's a fair reflection of what's going on in that video?
Well, it strikes me because one of the things that Emily said was that the psychology world condemns the practice of conversion therapy. But I think it's very interesting that when we look at it from a historical perspective, there are some very important lessons to be learned, because it was not always that way. And this is one of my favorite books that I've read about the topic so far, Reparative Therapy of Male Homosexuality by Joseph Nicolosi. And in page 7, it is written here, all three great pioneers of psychiatry, Freud, Jung, and Adler, saw homosexuality as pathological. Yet today, homosexuality is not to be found in the psychiatric manual of mental disorders. And then he goes on to say, research did not settle the question. It is politics that has stopped the professional dialogue. And he goes on to basically talk about how it changed from it being classed by the American Psychiatric Association as a sociopathic personality disturbance, to then being categorized as a sexual deviation. And then eventually it was not even referred to at all. So the history of it is very interesting, and how politics has stopped the professional dialogue. But actually, most of the people, actually, I think all of the people who testified in the X Out Loud UK Heroes had a faith experience, and it was the word of God that convicted them, and in relationship with God, they testify that they found who they are in God's sight, and they affirm their identities according to their biological sex and their God-given identity, and so some of them might have looked for counseling, actually, whether that's pastoral or secular counseling, and I know that some of them have benefited from such counseling, and so
But the thing is, Matthew, and I'd love to hear from Simon on this, what strikes me in X Out Loud is people came and shared their stories. They identified with the mission of X Out Loud, if you like, and they joined shoulder to shoulder, wanting to engage in this activity of testifying and sharing about the transformation that they were experiencing. So it wasn't that they were taught into this worldview. This is something they bought. They are individual people who have been living separate lives and who have their own unique experience, and none are the same. Everybody's very unique. And they came together, and that's the product of it. This is not the fruit of some teaching that everybody has absorbed. What do you say, Simon? We're talking about you, and you're sitting right here, and you've experienced all of this.
Well, what I'm wondering is what is disturbing about our testimonies? What is disturbing and fascinating at the same time? Is it disturbing that we told the truth? What does Emily Sargent exactly mean about our stories being disturbing? As sort of different viewers would have listened to my testimony, my story come out was very organic. I was a bit jittery, I was nervous, and I stammered a bit as I was telling my story. And I think anybody listening to my story on that on those video clips would see that that I wasn't coached in any way at all. And my journey so far has never sort of focused on my struggle. Any time that I have struggled, I've spoken to my pastor, just as a normal conversation on the phone, and my pastor has never focused on the same-sex struggle. He has never focused in his advice or counsel. In fact, many times he said, well, to be honest with Simon, I don't know too much how to deal with that, but this is how I've dealt with temptation, sexual temptation, this, that, and the other. There's many times that in my local church that I've just gone out to prayer lines and just been prayed for and saying, pray as you feel led. There's many times that I've just been reading the Bible, that I've just been praying, and I've just felt God's presence just saturate my heart. I remember one day that I was going down to the park, my lawn, and I was very agitated. I was very sort of worked up, and I just felt the presence of God still my heart, and like this invisible hand pushed down. It was very tangible. It was very real. I'm not absorbing any language. I can only speak of my own personal experience, what is real to me, and I can assure you it is real. I have no sort of agenda or I have gain from sort of saying all of this. In fact, I could be persecuted from coming from this point of view. I can only say, I can't help telling what my story is, and it needs to be told. Exactly. It needs to be shared. This subject is taboo in many circles, and people like myself, we need to express, we need to say what's on our hearts, we need to tell others what our journey has been like.
Exactly. Well, Simon.
Yes.
You've said it very well.
What's on my heart.
You've said it so well, and it's from your heart. Absolutely. We are so grateful to hear you again. Folks, I'd like to just listen to one more video. Here's the BBC reporting on conversion therapy. Laura, I'd like you to pay careful attention to what the psychologist says in this, and then give me your assessment, if you would, at the end.
There are calls for counselling services that try to change someone's sexuality to be banned. The Prime Minister has called it abhorrent and promised to outlaw what's known as conversion therapy, which is opposed by the NHS and major professional bodies in the UK. But organisations promoting it insist it's ethical. Our Ireland correspondent Emma Vardy has been speaking to one man who attended these sessions but described himself as broken after years trying to change his sexuality.
Perhaps X Factor's not the place you'd expect to spark debate about a controversial therapy. But the Maltese contestant Matthew Grech made headlines on the show saying he was ex-gay.
It is our vision and mission to raise an army of formerly gay.
He's now a director of the charity Core Issues Trust in Northern Ireland.
Welcome to X Out Loud.
And running a campaign which promotes the view sexuality can be altered.
I felt like something was deeply wrong with me and that I needed help.
Gareth is a qualified medical doctor in Manchester. But growing up in Northern Ireland, he began counselling with Core Issues and later other groups over 4 years.
I was about 14 years old when I first became aware that I was attracted to men. And within the community that I was a part of, it was very difficult for me to talk about that with anyone. And I actually opened up to someone at a Christian convention. They had known of someone that would be able to offer therapy.
What was your mindset going into this type of counselling?
I just knew that I needed to get rid of this part of myself. And really, I went in wholeheartedly, 100%. Pretty soon after it began, my mental health took a drastic turn for the worst. There's a huge pressure for you to stick with it and to keep trying to try harder, to delve deeper into the problems that might have caused this.
Eventually, Gareth ended the therapy. He's now openly gay and in a relationship, but it took several years, he says, to move on.
I felt really, really broken. There are other people out there who are going through the exact same thing.
Holding on to ethical values and
back in Northern Ireland, the man at the helm of Core Issues Trust, Mike Davidson, rejects the term conversion therapy and says they support people, like X Factor's Matthew Grech, who want to leave same-sex attraction behind.
Is it fair to try and change someone's sexuality when there's clear examples of where this doesn't work?
Well, it's not us trying to change anybody. People seek us out because they hear of people who are going in a different direction.
For someone whose feelings don't change through this process, isn't there the risk that you leave them mentally much worse off?
Well, that is a concern, and that's part of the advanced informed consent. What we are promoting is an exploration of sexual fluidity, and what we find over a period of time, when behaviours change, feelings begin to change.
Hey everyone, another week.
LGBT campaigners argue the existence of the therapy at all reinforces prejudiced views that it's wrong to be gay.
Boris Johnson said the government plans to carry out a study into so-called conversion therapy before bringing forward new laws to ban it.
What the research would say is that actually we cannot change somebody's sexuality, and all those professions have released statements to say that practitioners should not be aiming to do that.
But it isn't clear how the practice will be defined and where to draw the line. Emma Vardy, BBC News.
So here's the thing, folks. You notice that Dr. Gareth, it was claimed, was attending therapy with Core Issues Trust. But lo and behold, it works out that there were probably 3 or 4 emails in our records that show he came for one meeting when I was serving a different organization. He was never a client of Core Issues Trust. And when we complained to the BBC, well, guess what? We got no response. And then eventually when we did get a response, they would not acknowledge that they had made a mistake. But Laura, over to you. You heard what the psychologist said. Do you agree?
Well, previously, a few minutes ago, I talked about 2 silos, 2 world views, the LGBT identified and the non-LGBT identified. The research is also being done in these silos. Now, for research of people who do not identify as LGBT but have these feelings, let's see, there's a longitudinal study that was done on those who were in a faith-based situation, and it found that the majority did experience change. And for some, it was a complete change. For some, it was a substantial change, so that their same-sex attraction didn't bother them and they were able to live the life they chose. There were some who did not change and went on to take an LGB identity and live as LGB in that lifestyle. So I know the word lifestyle is upsetting to some, but we think of feelings and behaviors as different aspects, and that someone who has feelings may choose how they want to live with those feelings. So that showed success. A recent study came out finding that 70 studied religious men, 88% were attended weekly services in their Orthodox faiths, and more than 2/3, 69%, experienced a change from homosexual to heterosexual attraction. Some of those men, 41%, were married and had children on average. Nearly all had children, on average 3 children each. Before therapy, their same-sex behavior, 71% were engaged in it. After therapy, it plunged to 14%. So what it means to these people, that their men, their wives, and their children, it can hardly be expressed. Now, as for those who do not change, a study was done by Blaznick and colleagues. It came out, I believe, this year, but it may have been last year. Anyway, it's recent. And it is the only study that's been done on harm that is nationally representative. They only looked at people LGB identified. Therefore, nobody who changed was permitted to be in the study. No non-LGBT people or ex-LGBT people. So it was only people who did not change. They only looked at the levels of depression or suicidality in the present. They did not look at their levels before therapy. Though they had that data, they intentionally did not compare before and after. They only looked at after and drew conclusions. Well, the therapy must be causing their depression and suicidality. Well, a researcher came along, Sullins, and he has analyzed their data, comparing the before and after. He used the before data that they had and decided not to use. He compared the suicidality and depression before therapy and after exploring therapy. And he found that their suicidality decreased for minors and dramatically decreased for adults. So where's the harm? Therapy can be helpful. It's helpful whether or not somebody changes their same-sex attraction. Some people don't, but they can still be helped in other ways. Therapy has many benefits.
But the point is, Laura, there's something fishy going on, isn't there? When people who have benefited from therapeutic interventions are prevented from being part of a research sample. We find exactly the same thing in the 2017 National LGBT Survey. Exactly the same thing. You couldn't participate in it if you were no longer LGBT. It's a crying shame. But
it's
Simon,
a template, Mike, it's a template. That's how all the harm research is. Virtually all the contemporary change allowing research is being done.
And there's a template in the legislation, isn't there, when it comes to conversion therapy? So you can go to Victoria, you can look at what's happening in Canada, you can look at what's happened in or is on the cards in Ireland. You can look way back to what happened in 2016 in Malta, and you can see that there is certainly a great deal of working together and pushing this agenda forward. And I think it's the same thing in the harm context, is what you're saying. Is that fair?
Yeah, right. Yes, it's an agenda-driven research, using biased methods.
So it's advocacy research. It's not inquiry research. It's advocating a particular point of view. But folks, before we come to the end here, never mind therapeutic interventions. Simon, what do you say? Is change possible? And what do we mean by change? And I'd love to hear Matthew reflect on the same thing. If somebody said to you, have you experienced change in your life? What would you say, Simon? What kind of change?
I would say yes. First of all, I feel change internally. I have a sense of peace, and that is increasing over the years. I have I'm less anxious, and I'm more calmer than I used to be, and I am so erratic in the way that I was living, and obsessed with things, and obsessed with men, and what I have experienced is that it has been gradual and over the process of time. And for me, I can't say that all the feelings are sort of gone, but it is how can I say? I'm in a transition, and I just sense my heart something's broken. You know. That's what it is for me.
It's very helpful, Simon. I mean, I think what you're saying is it's not perfection, but there's been a qualitative change within you that is beginning. Is that fair?
Yes, that's right. And I can say unequivocally that these past 8 years in my life has been the best 8 years of my life, and I can say that unequivocally.
Wow.
I have a better quality of life.
Well, that's a great testimony. How about you, Matthew? What do we mean by change, and how do you use that term?
I can echo what Simon just said. What I experienced is that when I was convicted by the word of God, my will changed, my choices changed. All of a sudden, I did not want to be in a gay relationship, and I stopped it. Now, how do you go from wanting one thing 1 minute to wanting something completely different the next minute? You know, so that is change for me. And you know, when I look back at some videos of myself from a couple of years ago, I could not look at them because I feel like I was a very different man. I feel like I think I struggled with a lot of anxiety because I was helplessly very feminine looking. And so I had terrible anxiety because of that. But now I'm much more confident with myself, and I see the work of the Holy Spirit in my life. And I'm really grateful. This is just Him at work in us. So that for me was a change that helped me feel more secure with myself as a man. And I also noticed that initially I just wanted to be single for all my life, and was not open to the idea of being in a relationship with a woman. And actually it has been a process for me. But by growing in understanding and knowledge and wisdom, here I am today, and I'm open to getting married to the woman that God has for me. And that took a lot of chiseling, a lot of pruning in my heart for me to actually even be able to imagine that and visualize it, you know. And I know that with God, all things are possible, and everything is possible for those who believe. So yeah, I don't view men the same way because I understand and I see my manhood and my masculinity. And I think that's what it is. When we know who we are in Christ, then we will look at people of the same gender in a godly way, the way God intended for us to look at them. And so, yeah, I'm looking forward to see what God is planning. I'm taking it day by day. It's all good.
Thank you so much, Matthew. And Simon, Freelove in Wales, it's been great to see you. Thank you so much for your time. And Matthew in Malta. And of course, Laura, thank you for your time this evening. Folks, sounds to me like there have been some significant movements in these people's lives, that they have a quality of life, as Simon said now, that doesn't compare with where they were a few years ago. And surely we can't deny them that, and we can't deny them the right and the freedom to walk in the direction that they want to go. Now, if you're going to follow the series, you might do well to listen to, I guess, part 3 of Emily Sargent's podcast tomorrow on stories of our times. It has to do with the Times and the Sunday Times magazine. Just go there, you can listen to it, just search for Thinking Straight. We're thinking gay right now, reversing the roles and trying to get into an understanding of where Emily is coming from, because frankly, we don't understand what she says when she talks about everything being so secretive. I don't think it's a secret at all. Change is possible, and we should have the right to access the help that we want if we would like to. Thank you so much for joining us tonight. Good night, friends. Thank you for being with us. Good night.